I'm Pastor David Stark, and you just tuned into the Grace Presbyterian Church of Redding, California's YouTube channel. And it's Tuesday night, September the 20th in the year 2022. And tonight we're going to be studying 2Samuel chapter 19. So if you want to grab your Bible and join us, you can. If you want to leave a message, we'd be happy to hear from you. If you're watching this live stream, you can do that. If you're watching it recorded, you can get in touch with us at our website, which is gpcreading.org. So let us know you're out there, and we appreciate that. Anyway, God bless you. We'll get started here. We're just finishing singing Psalm 2, so we'll listen to that. Amen. Thank you. All righty. Zach, would you like to help pass this out? There we go. Oh, pass them out. Give them up. Everyone to do that?
Yeah, they're kidding. You don't say chords anymore. You don't say chords anymore.
There should be enough for everybody to have one, I would think. Okay, we're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 19 as the story of Absalom, or the episode concerning Absalom. Thank you, sir. It's kind of winding down, and this chapter pretty well comes to an end. So we're at the end of that. And at 2 Samuel chapter 19. A little longer than some of the other chapters, but it's pretty succinct. It's not hard to get through it, I think. But this is, after the defeat of the forces that had allied themselves with Absalom in Absalom's rebellion. We're reading about the events that took place immediately after, and then it extends here for probably a week or so, or maybe a month. But then it concludes with, life begins to go back to normal. But there were some problems that arose, obviously, because 10 of the tribes had sided with Absalom's rebellion and had anointed him king. They had their reasons thinking that it was time for a new king, and Absalom had stolen their hearts, we're told. I think everybody's familiar with what had happened before. Absalom, stole the hearts of the men of Israel, and then he declared himself king. And then his counselor, Ahithophel, who had been David's counselor and friend, gave him advice initially to go in and defile his father's concubines in the sight of everyone, just to make sure that everybody understood there's an absolute break here. There's going to be no reconciliation. It's over and done with between David and Absalom. And so then Ahithophel advised him, go immediately. Actually, Ahithophel said, let me go immediately, and I'll find your dad with chosen troops. I'll kill him. It'll be over. The people will come back. You'll be king over Israel and Judah, period. And then Hushai, David's friend, counseled, Absalom. We might say almost for no reason on earth. Absalom wanted to hear what Hushai had to say. And so Hushai counseled him and said, oh, no, don't do that. You need to wait, build this up, etc. And then have all Israel go. And if he's in a city, you can take ropes and pull down the wall of the city, and everybody will see what a great king you are, basically. And Absalom decided to go with Hushai's advice. So Ahithophel went, and he knew it was over because he knew that Hushai's advice was going to lead to disaster. And in the meanwhile, they got a message to David that there's a possibility Absalom might follow Ahithophel's advice and come after you immediately. So get out of here. So David fled to Mahanaim, and which was a fortified city. And so he was there, and then the battle started. As you know, we saw last week, Absalom's forces were defeated, and then Absalom riding in the woods. And my wife pointed this out to me, correctly so. It says he got his head stuck, but it's pretty clear. I don't think we're stretching it to say it was probably his hair got caught in it. There's a possibility he just got his head wedged, but it sounds probably more his hair, because the hair of his head, and there was an emphasis on Absalom's long hair that he only cut it once a year, and it grew pretty thick and heavy. So it's not a stretch to say more than likely that's how he got caught in the thicket. Yeah, some of us would be pretty safe on that account. And so Absalom then killed him and had his young men that were his armor bearers also finish him off. And then they came and told David. So we're going to pick up tonight's narrative. We're going to actually start in the last, I think the last verse of chapter 18, because that's probably where the chapter division, if I was setting up chapter divisions, I'd put it there. And I actually noticed one Bible, I think it's the Net Bible, which kind of a newer version, but anyway, they actually just went ahead and put the chapter at what would be the last verse of 18. They start 19, a verse ahead of time. They figured that's the way it should have been done. I don't know. Chapter divisions and verse divisions aren't necessarily inspired, so I guess you could do that. So, okay, we begin reading at verse 33 of chapter 18. This is after David has been told that Absalom is dead. So then we read, Then the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place, O Absalom, my son, my son. And Joab was told, Behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard it said that day, the king is grieved for his son. And the people stole back into the city that day as people who are ashamed steal back when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, Today you have disgraced all your servants who today have saved your life, the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines, in that you love your enemies and hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then it would have pleased you well. Now therefore arise, go out, and speak comfort to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, no one will stay with you this night. And that will be worse for you than all the evil that has befallen you from your youth until now. Then the king arose and sat in the gate. And they told all the people, saying, There is the king sitting in the gate. So all the people came before the king. For everyone of Israel had fled to his tent. Those are the guys that had backed Absalom. Now all the people were in dispute throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The king saved us from the hand of our enemies. He delivered us from the hand of the Philistines. And now he has fled from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died in battle. Now, therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing back the king? So David sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priest, saying, Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, Why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the word of all Israel have come to the king, to his very house? You are my brethren, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, Are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me and more also, if you are not commander of the army before me continually in place of Joab. So he swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah, just as the heart of one man, so that they sent this word to the king, Return, you and all your servants. Then the king returned and came to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to go to meet the king, to escort the king across the Jordan. And Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite, who was from Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. There were thousands of men of Benjamin with him, and Zeba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him. And they went over the Jordan before the king. Then a ferry boat went across to carry over the king's household and to do what he thought good. Now Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king when he had crossed the Jordan. Then he said to the king, "Do not let my lord impute iniquity to me, or remember what wrong your servant did on the day that my lord the king left Jerusalem, that the king should take it to heart. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned. Therefore here I am, the first to come today of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my lord the king." But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered and said, "Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" And David said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should be adversaries to me today? Shall any man be put to death today in Israel? For do I not know that today I am king over Israel?" Therefore the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king swore to him. Now Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, okay, that means grandson clearly in the context, came down to meet the king, and he had not cared for his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he returned in peace. So it was, when he had come to Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "My lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go to the king, because your servant is lame. And he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God. Therefore do what is good in your eyes. For all my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king. Yet you set your servant among those who eat at your own table. Therefore what right have I still to cry out any more to the king?" So the king said to him, "Why do you speak any more of your matters? I have said, you and Zeba divide the land." Then Mephibosheth said to the king, "Rather let him take it all, inasmuch as my lord the king has come back in peace to his own house." And Barzillai, the Gileadite, came down from Rogelim and went across the Jordan with the king to escort him across the Jordan. Now Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old, and he had provided the king with supplies while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very rich man. And the king said to Barzillai, "Come across with me, and I will provide for you while you are with me in Jerusalem." But Barzillai said to the king, "How long have I to live that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am today 80 years old. Can I discern between the good and the bad, and bad? Can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any longer the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be a further burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go a little way across the Jordan with the king, and why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant turn back again, that I may die in my own city, near the grave of my father and mother. But here is your servant Chimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king, and do for him what seems good to you." And the king answered, "Chimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him what seems good to you. Now, whatever you request of me, I will do for you." Then all the people went over the Jordan. And when the king had crossed over, the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own place. Now the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him. And all the people of Judah escorted the king, and also half the people of Israel. Just then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, "Why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king, his household, and all David's men with him across the Jordan. So all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is a close relative of ours. Why then are you angry over this matter? Have we ever eaten at the king's expense, or has he given us any gift? And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 shares in the king. Therefore we also have more right to David than you. Why then do you despise us? Were we not the first to advise bringing back our king? Yet the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. Amen. So that's chapter 19. A lot going on there. It starts off, they would just put down a rebellion with the men of Israel, and at the end they were fighting over him. So kind of a nice problem for David to have. So let's see if we can answer some questions here, if you guys were all listening and paying attention, okay? And I'm sure you were, by the way. Question number 1, okay? What effect did David's mourning have upon the people? Anybody catch that? Yeah. Well, Rosie, got your hand up. Go ahead.
The people started mourning too.
Do what now?
The people started mourning too.
Yeah, it kind of took as we would say, it took the wind out of their sails, okay, and made them. They snuck back into the city like people that had escaped from battle or run away from battle, and like they were ashamed of themselves after they have this victory. And so now we come to number 2. So I think that we all got that. That's the setting up for what the first half of the chapter is about. So this is a question for you to think about, and do think about it, okay? I realize Joab doesn't always fare too well, but sometimes he does, seem like, well, maybe he was the guy that needed to be there for that time. But was Joab's rebuke to David for his untimely and excessive mourning correct? Alex?
I would say yes.
All right. Okay. Anybody want to say no?
Well, yeah, I mean,
No.
he has all his concubines, and he's mourning the loss of his son who did evil.
Yeah.
It's really a disgrace to all the people that suffered under Absalom.
I think, I'm inclined to agree. I think it's pretty clear. Joab is probably speaking pretty correctly here. It's a typical Joab speech, though. Joab's actions are always harsh. He's threatening the king. He's not just consoling him or anything. He doesn't go and say, I'm sorry this happened. I know your heart's broken, but look, there's some other things we need to look at. He comes in and basically just is all over him like a dirty shirt on a hobo, as we say. And so he's telling him, yeah, if we were all dead, you'd be happy as long as Absalom was alive. But he also points out, he said, if it wasn't for us, you, your children, your wives, your concubines would have all been dead. Because I think Joab had a pretty good understanding of Absalom's character, because to a certain extent, they're birds of a feather, as they say. Absalom was willing to take really harsh measures. Like I say, his murder or execution, maybe is a better word to use, of his half-brother Amasa after Amasa had harmed Tamar, Absalom's sister, full-blooded sister. It wasn't done according to the judicial standards of the day, but because David didn't punish him, Absalom just took it into his own hands and killed him. And I think Joab is aware of the fact that Absalom was willing to throw the whole nation into convulsion and see a lot of people die, because we read that there were several thousand people died in the woods of Ephraim in the battle, from the woods themselves, not just from the battle. That this, Joab, I think, appraised that this Absalom character, even though he's the king's son, he's a pampered little brat, and he's more than willing to kill anybody that gets in his way at this point. And so Joab made the conclusion, this guy needs to die. Unfortunately, Joab makes that conclusion a few other times, and it's highly questionable. Okay, Joab didn't, but him and the other son of Zeruiah, Abishai, it seemed like sometimes they're a little quick to want to shed blood. But I think generally we'd say it needed to be done, but maybe it could have been done differently or better. Yes.
Absalom had burned Joab's field.
Yeah, Absalom burned Joab's field. Joab kind of got even with him and completely disregarded the king's order. But the king was very, very grieved over this. The Hebrew, by the way, when it talks about the king was grieving and mourning, that phrase mourning, it's in the Hitzpael form of the Hebrew verb. I know you're all happy to know that, right? It gives the idea of going on and on. Okay, like for instance, when it says in Job, when God asked Satan, "Where have you been?" and he said, "Walking to and fro throughout the earth." Well, all those English words, walking to and fro, that's how we have to translate one Hebrew verb that's put in. We don't do this in English, so it's just, if you want to learn some Hebrew, I'll show you. But they take the word for walking and put it in what's called the Hitzpael form. Just one word, they tweak it, they add the little prefix hith to it, and it gives the idea of repetitive, going on and on. And so walking, halak, when you say hit halak or hit halak, that means walking to and fro. Okay, so this is the word for grieving, but it's in the Hitzpael. So it's going on and on is with the idea. That's the picture here. And that's not what Joab said. That's what the narrator of this passage says. The author says that David was, well, actually the people, they said it, was David was mourning or grieving and mourning, that it was, going on and on and on. So, so how did David respond to Joab's rebuke? Anybody catch that? There's a couple things there, but Gary?
I just want to say something in David's behalf too. His mistake was that he went public with it and he went on and on with it. I mean, if you compare his response to Absalom's death with his response when his first child with Bathsheba, he said, "I'm going to go and be with him." So he was comforted by that. He didn't have that with Absalom. He knew his son was burning in Sheol at that moment.
More than likely.
Yeah. So I have compassion for him as a father. I understand, partially at least where he was at.
Well, I read a commentary one time on this passage, and they pointed out, when we look at David's excessive mourning, because it's not mourn, there's a time to refrain from mourning, okay? David, if he was indeed, as the text, well, not if he was clearly, he was going on and on. This was excessive mourning, and with complete disregard to all the risk people had taken, people coming in undoubtedly with wounds and bloodied up, people who had, in the shock of war, had seen friends die, had killed people. They're coming back in now. Now they're made to feel ashamed. So David's going on and on about it. And like I say, there's a time to mourn, but it was excessive. And earlier on, he had said, I'll go be with him, but he didn't necessarily have that. But the commentary I read said that David had received so much mercy from God, even though he was being chastened, but David had been forgiven. He knew he deserved to die. And he knew that this rebellion was a result of God's punishment on his wickedness. He committed adultery and then by extension murder. And God had forgiven him, but said there's going to be consequences. And one commentator said that if we really want to try to understand David's heart here, we see a man that's really been shown forgiveness. And he wanted so much to extend that same kindness toward Absalom. And he wanted that's why he told him, don't harm the young man. He really was hoping whatever their relationship was going to be, and Absalom had burnt every bridge he could think of to burn in his relationship with his dad. David was like, I don't care. If we can work this out, we're going to try to. But Joab didn't give him that opportunity. So, and Joab wasn't necessarily wrong in doing what he did. Shirley?
Well, that may be true, but I'm thinking David had 2 years to try to make up with his son, and he just wouldn't even have a conversation with him.
Well, he's out of balance on all this stuff. Dave, that's what sin does to you,
You can't ask for forgiveness. There's no communication.
Well, I'm just saying, I read a commentary on that. It seemed to make some sense. Why would David go on and on? Well, he knew now Absalom died, probably went to hell. Okay. Speaking in Old Testament, we'll say Sheol. His son is lost, possibly for eternity, more than likely. Guy dies in rebellion. But David probably would leave that in God's hands, I would imagine. But here he sees, okay, this guy, my son, he loved him, but Absalom was coming to kill him. So there's a lot going on in the passage. That's what I'm trying to bring out. But trying to understand David's excessive mourning, it's like, well, everything we know about David, he was a man that was shown great mercy and grace. And I think he was somehow hopeful that maybe his son would get right with God, and it didn't happen. So not that he knew of, seemed like there was no opportunity there. And also the manner of Absalom's death, he that is hanged on a tree is accursed of God, it says in the law, which applies to the cross when Christ took our curse. But here's Absalom hanging from a tree. Well, they cut him down and threw him in a pit and then piled rocks on top. So how did David respond? What did he do?
Got up and was at the gate.
Yeah, he got up and went to the gate, and he listened to what he said. We saw this also earlier when the people told David in the last chapter, they said, you're not going out to battle. Talking to the king. They're telling the king what he's not going to do. He said, you're not going out to battle. And David says, I'll do whatever you think is best. David was still humble and meek. Yes, Eric.
There's a lot of proverbs about being able to take correction from your friends, brothers, and it's a wise man that does that.
Yeah.
Listens to correction.
Yeah, I don't think that's where, I agree. I think
Wisdom on David's part.
David received the correction, but I don't think he let it lay there. Because what does he do later?
Goes over the-
Joab's commander of the army comes in and rebukes the king. What happens? He replaces him. He goes, yeah, thanks for the rebuke. I'll take your advice. Oh, by the way, you're fired. Okay. So yeah, David removed him. And it wasn't just because probably the rebuke, but it's because he'd given a specific order to him. It's like General MacArthur when he was in, I believe it was in Japan, he began to act somewhat independent from the executive branch. And so Truman just said, I'm your boss. And him and MacArthur, this is after the war, and the United States had occupied Japan. And it was big news back in the 50s. MacArthur basically was told, you're fired. And he was forced into retirement because he wouldn't do what the president wanted him to do. And it was it wasn't anything like major. He just was acting a little too independently. And some people had to point out to General MacArthur was a pretty good guy, okay, as far as generals, but some people had to point out to him, Japan already has an emperor. They don't need another one. So I think Truman pointed that out to him. So Truman recalled him and busted him down. That's kind of the reason why I mentioned that. It's kind of what I think is going on here. But we'll talk about that in just a moment because it comes up here in the next few questions. So, question number 4 was, what dilemma did the men of Israel find themselves in? Clint, did you want to?
I guess they had anointed Absalom as king, and now he's dead, and they realize they messed up. So they have to accept David back as king, or go to war or something. They got to figure something out here.
It is interesting that they don't declare independence and say, well, we'll just go anoint somebody else. They actually, even though, it's like, well, they really did break with David. They didn't break with the house of David. Absalom was David's son. So, the promises that were given to David regarding his greater son, etc., the men of Israel could, probably said, we didn't break faith with the house of David. We just broke faith with him. And I'm sure some of them probably pointed out David's failures as a king. But now, like they say, we rebelled against David and we anointed Absalom, and now Absalom's dead. And what does this mean for us? And they do seem to kind of recognize this means David is still our king. So very interesting what's going on here. They don't say, oh, well, we're not under allegiance to David any longer because we anointed Absalom. They said, no, we're still part of the nation with David as our king. It was like, what do we do? I think that's a pretty interesting dilemma, okay?
Maybe it's self-preservation too.
Yeah, the idea, well, they just got their, tails whipped, I think is the old way they'd say it, by the army of David. And it's like they knew, okay, we just got defeated in a big battle. And if we basically, it's like we've been defeated. What do we do now? Well, the king, we're in his power, we're not going to fight him because we're not going to win. So, yeah, they decided maybe we should just work on getting the king back back on the throne here in Jerusalem, or in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is in the area of Judea, so that's why he calls for the elders. Okay, so why did David reprove the elders of Judah? Number 5, he sends, and through the priest, he sends them a reproof. Okay, anybody catch that?
Yeah, they were the last to bring the king back to his house.
Yeah, he's like, guys, it is interesting. David didn't just ride back to Jerusalem and say, I'm your king again. Wasn't sure where he stood. Now, the men of Judah had not rebelled, but they'd gone back home, I guess, most of them. And the men of Israel had rebelled. And so the idea is if the king is going to come back, there is an aspect of, you see, even in the Old Testament, that kings did not rule apart from the consent of the representatives of the tribes. Okay, the government of Israel really was, not talking about political party. Republican means representative government. We see they had that in Israel. David, he writes to the elders and says, you guys, I need to be, brought back to Jerusalem, but I need your consent. Well, how come you guys haven't taken action on this? And the guys up north had done the same thing. So again, we see that even in the Old Testament, kings ruled with the consent of the people. So this was not an absolute monarchy. It's like, doesn't matter what the people think or what they want or anything else. The king's king. If he decrees that that's the end of it, he actually consulted with them, and the same way they anointed him. Remember, he was anointed 3 times, once by Samuel and then by the tribe of Judah, the elders of Judah, and then the elders later of all Israel anointed him. So David ruled by the consent of the people. And so he's telling Judah, you guys need to be a little more official on this than what you're doing. Okay, so kind of answered this one maybe, but let's talk about it. Why did David appoint Amasa head over his army? And was this a wise move on David's part? It doesn't say exactly why, but why did David appoint Amasa? I kind of, talked about that a minute ago. What do you think? Amasa, by the way, that was the guy that was the general of Absalom's troops. David had just fought a war. This would be like, the South loses the war, and then Lincoln, if he lived, appoints Robert E. Lee to be head of the Union Army. Okay, that's basically kind of like this, all right? Except that was a lot more lengthy conflict, where this was one battle and it was done. So yeah, it seems kind of interesting. So why did he do it, Alex?
Just to guess it, but to show unity of the people. Say, look, this is, the battle's done and over, and now we're one people again. And so he's our commander of our army.
Yeah. It probably that's what he's thinking. Politically, it's a pretty good move. Okay, I think. Any other reasons?
Rightly or wrongly, Joab had killed his son.
Yeah, it's time for Joab. In David's mind, this is a guy that doesn't follow orders. Okay, so any other ideas? Was it a wise move on David? Oh yeah, go ahead.
I don't know, maybe in the battle he saw some strategy and from that one general and he liked it, so he decided to make him, big hump jump.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of reasons. It's, we can't always say exactly what it was, but it does seem like the unity thing seems probably to be the best answer. It's like, this guy was the commander in chief of all the people that rebelled against him. So it's kind of David's way of saying, look, let's get this behind us, okay? Amasa's been a good man. Yeah, he got a little confused. He got seduced by, Absalom's charm. That's done with now, and he knows better. So he sends a message, and he said, consider yourself commander of the army of Israel still, and of my troops. So it's a very magnanimous move on David's part. But
Just one last thing, maybe it's kind of a tribute to his son's decision-making, because he's been mourning him so much.
yeah, okay. Well,
Absalom appointed him, and I'll keep it as Absalom.
Okay, so do you think it was a wise move on David's part to do this? I know he did it. I know why he did it, but was that the best move he could have made?
Depends what happens.
Could he have done it better? Okay, I think the only thing I would, who am I to sit and criticize King David? Okay, that'd be pretty stupid on my part. But when I look at it, I'm thinking like he should have done something about Joab. Joab's still running loose, and he still has a huge following. Could be maybe David thought, well, I'll just, let Joab do what he wants to do. And it could be that, he's not just putting Amasa over Israel. He says he'll be commander of before me in the place of Joab. He replaces Joab there, but Joab's still running loose. Yes.
Well, it's a good day for Mesa too, because him being the leader of Absalom's army, he might not have been sure what David was going to do with him.
Yeah, because he deserved to die for what he'd done.
So that could be some mercy David showed him.
Yeah, so David is showing mercy clearly. Yes.
He put Amasa in danger too, and I think Joab kills him later, doesn't he?
Oh yeah. Joab acts like Joab.
He didn't do Amasa any favors, I guess.
Yeah. So
take Joab's position.
By the way, Amasa is David's nephew. If you look up some other verses, I didn't want to look them all up tonight, but he's close kin to David. So this is not a stretch or a foreigner being put. That it seems that there's pretty good connection, that he's related pretty closely to David. Okay, so like I say, I think it was a wise move in one sense, but it maybe could have been done better. But then again, how do you factor in Joab on any of this? The guy's a loose cannon very clearly. Okay. So who met David at Gilgal on his return to Judah? It's a pretty simple one. Okay. Who met him? Seems like everybody pretty much, huh? Okay. The one thing is interesting is Shimei meets him, and then Mephibosheth. And so let's jump down there. That's important. Well, we've got a couple minutes here. But first of all, what do we learn about Shimei's character from this chapter? Shimei, what's he doing? He goes, "Oh, please forgive your servant. I acted really foolishly." He was throwing rocks at David on the way out. Now he's cursing him and calling him a bloody man. So what do we learn about Shimei now? What do we see? What do we see about this guy?
He's a politician.
He's something else. Yeah. He said, "Oh, that was a mistake. I didn't." What he should have done is said, "I thought you were going to get killed, man. So I didn't. I thought Absalom was going to kill you. So please, that didn't happen. So could we be back? Could we be friends again?" Okay. So Shimei tells him, and David actually swears to him that he's not going to kill him. But we're going to look at that in just a moment here.
You could say that I was doing like you did, David, where I was pretending I was mad. I was mad at that point.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. But he does acknowledge, he does say, "I had sinned," verse 20, "for I, your servant, know that I have sinned." So he did acknowledge his sin, but it's like, okay. So now let's move on. Something a little more important. Do you believe Mephibosheth's version of what happened to him when David fled from Jerusalem? So Mephibosheth says why, he didn't go. We give an account of it, that he didn't change his clothes or groom himself, or, he just as a testimony that he wasn't in favor of what happened. Seems reasonable. He says Zeba lied, and that's why he showed. Remember, Zeba showed up with empty saddle, and David asked, "What's this for?" And then Zeba said, "Oh, it's in case any of my lord the king's servants are tired. I brought an extra horse there for him, or mule, or whatever." And so Mephibosheth says, "No, he was supposed to saddle it for me, and he left me here because I'm crippled. I couldn't do anything about it." Does it sound, how many of you think Mephibosheth's telling the truth here? What probably really happened? Some of you don't know. How many think Mephibosheth's just making up stories? Well, okay, we got a few hard ones here. Okay, why do you think that, Chinoa? If you don't mind. Do you think Mephibosheth's story doesn't hold water, or doesn't sound true to you? Okay, you think about it. I'm not going to put you on the spot. What was that?
She's just not a trusting person.
I know. She's like, he's probably lying. He's a boy. My mama told me they all lie, right?
Is there another passage that goes further into Zeba's deception?
Pardon me now?
Isn't there another passage that goes further into Zeba's deception?
Well, this is the main one, but there's a little bit. There's another passage we're going to look at real quick here. Yes, Eric?
He was a rich man. If he really wanted to get there, he could find another way. And
Well,
he was gone.
yeah.
He had no time to let his toenails grow up, everything else.
Well, look how quickly, though, Absalom occupied the city. Mephibosheth's crippled. He really can't do anything without help, okay? All of his servants have left. Zeba left with all of his sons, okay? And had he like went to somebody and said, "Hey, I'll give you some money if you'll get me out of Jerusalem," all they had to do was go to Absalom, and that would have been the death of Mephibosheth. So I'm inclined to think that Mephibosheth's telling the truth. Okay, and Mephibosheth, in order to show that, he just decided, if I can't go, I'm going to show. So he quit shaving. He quit, cleaning, being clean. He quit, his clothes. He just wore the same clothes. And apparently, we're talking several months here, or at least for long enough where you'd notice if he didn't change his clothes or you shave, or trim his beard, I guess is the idea. So I think he's telling the truth. So I think the Zeba guy was a stinker myself. Okay, but David, the next thing is, in your opinion, that's my opinion. You're entitled to yours, obviously. That's why I'm just asking what you think about this. In your opinion, did David settle the matter between Mephibosheth and Zeba correctly? Because remember what he told him? He said, "You and Zeba divide the land." He just said, all the holdings, half's going to go to Zeba, half to you. Now, the problem with that is if Zeba's telling the truth, then David just gave Mephibosheth back half of his wealth. If Mephibosheth is telling the truth, then he just basically rewarded Zeba's deception. That's the problem. But do you understand why? Anybody want to explain why did David do this?
He wasn't as wise as Solomon, and he couldn't figure out who was telling the truth.
Okay, that seems to be what it is. It's Jeremiah.
Never mind.
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
I think it was kind of like it's like, I think part of it too is like enough of all the killing, and let's bring the nation back together. Let's heal.
There you go.
I don't think he wanted to, because obviously that's a pretty major thing. Somebody's going to end up dying over it. So he said, let's not go.
Okay. Well, okay. Eric?
Didn't he already give that to Mephibosheth? It's his name. So he's kind of taking it away from him, here's what I was going to give you and what you're owed. Now I'm coming back and splitting it up differently, and it's kind of weird that he's going back on his earliest promise.
But what did Mephibosheth say? He said, "Let Zeba take it all. I don't want any of it. Let him have it all. I don't care. You come back safe. That's all that matters." So Mephibosheth isn't like, "I want my land back." Mephibosheth is like, "No, you're here. You're safe." I don't think that's the connivings of a desperate soul. I think that's a really noble person telling David, "You're here. You're safe. That's all I care about. I don't care what happens to me. You're safe. He can have it all." I like to think David didn't give Zeba all of it, but Mephibosheth is like, "I'm not interested in property. I'm just thankful that you're here." Okay, so and then real quick here, we got two more. I want to get to the last one. If I can, you guys don't mind if we go a couple more minutes. What do we learn about the character of David's friend Barzillai in this chapter? He's kind of an interesting person. Just kind of shows up, and then that's the end of it. Yeah.
I just think it's really honorable, as a godly 80-year-old man, that he's more concerned, because Shimham is his son, right?
Yeah, we'll find that out in a minute. Yeah.
So he said, "Why waste the pleasures of the king's court on me? I'm an old man. Let my son go in my place and let him reap the benefits of being
Yeah, he's like, I just as soon stay home and do nothing.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah.
And he was more concerned about his son's advancement than his own.
Yeah. What was it? The thing I saw where the guy says, "When I was young, punishment was not getting to go out and getting to go to the party and having to stay home. And now that I'm old, it's just the opposite. Non-punishment is not having to go to the party and getting to stay home." So, that's kind of how he is. So, okay. So, the next one, 1 Kings 2, 5-9. Somebody want to turn there? 1 Kings, it's the next book over. Chapter 2. This is where David is advising Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 5-9. David is getting ready to turn things over to Solomon, and so he advises him. Let's see, in verse 5. So somebody want to read verses 5-9? I think that's, they're long verses. Who would like to read that out loud? Alex, you got it? Oh, go ahead, loud and clear.
1 Kings chapter 2, verse 5. Sorry, I was the second king, but just a moment.
Now, the purpose of this is, well, how does this help us understand that chapter 19 of 2 Samuel? You got it there in your Bible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Says, moreover, you know also what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, and what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner the son of Ner, and Amasa the son of Jether, whom he killed. And he shed the blood of war in peacetime, and put the blood of war on his belt that was around his waist, and on his sandals that were on his feet. Therefore, do according to your wisdom, and do not let his gray hair go down to the grave in peace. But show kindness to the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For so they came to me when I fled from Absalom, your brother. And see, you have with you Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite from Bahurim, who cursed me with a malicious curse in the day when I went to Mahanaim. But he came down to me to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. Now therefore do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man and know what you ought to do to him. But bring his gray hair down to the grave with blood.
So David's like, I told him I wouldn't kill him, but I didn't say anything about you. Okay? And that's exactly what's going on here. So he's telling them, basically, these are guys you need to get out of make sure these weeds are not growing in your garden, okay? Because these guys are bad people and you need to deal with them or you'll wish you had, kind of. So what do we learn about all of this? Basically, anything? Kind of gives us a little insight. This is where we see the Bible interpreting the Bible. Okay, then the 14, I'll just answer for time. The quarrel developed between the men of Israel and Judah about bringing the king back, right? Okay, they needed to restore him back into his position and make it clear that he had their consent. Okay, and then who won that quarrel and why did they win it? The men of Judah won. Why? Because their words were fiercer. Apparently, they were rather insistent that they were going to be the ones that would bring him back home. So they won that argument. And the guys in Israel, they had just gotten trashed in battle by the men of Judah a little bit before this. So they're not going to argue with them a whole lot. But we do see later under Solomon's son Rehoboam, when the northern tribes rebelled, we do kind of see the beginning of that idea of separation really obviously taking place at this time, because under Absalom, the northern tribes had separated from the southern, because Judah seems largely to have backed David, and the northern tribes had rebelled. And so that later on, within a generation or within two generations, within about, 40 something years of this, that's going to happen. So, all right, well, that's tonight's Bible study. So we've actually concluded the story of Absalom. We see some other thing. Remember, God told David, the sword's not going to depart out of your house. So David's going to have some more troubles in the oncoming chapter. So all that being said, let's go ahead and Clint, would you close us in prayer, brother?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you so much for your word. Lord, we just thank you that we can study about David and other characters in the Bible. Father, we just pray that Lord, that you would help us to seek you all always, and Lord, seek your wisdom and your truth. And Lord, we again thank you for just that we can study your word. Pray all this in Jesus' name. Lord, be with us as we leave this place. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, guys. God bless you. And for those of you that were watching via live stream, or if you're watching this as recording, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back here Sunday at about 10:30 a.m. So if you'd like to join us, I'd love to have you. Thanks for tuning in. God bless you. Bye-bye.